Some night recently, maybe last night, maybe a week ago, maybe a year ago, at a time you remember without being able to place, you had a dream. You were inside it. You were somewhere familiar but slightly wrong, and in the dream, maybe you were trying to fly or talking with someone who has been dead for years, or simply standing in a room whose light was a color you've never actually seen. And while you were in it, none of it struck you as strange. The flying was normal. The dead person was normal. The color was normal. You woke in the morning and noticed, all at once, the full absurdity of it. How did I not question any of that? And you shrugged, and you got on with your day. Your brain does this every night. Every human does. Every mammal does. Something inside a 1.4 kilogram organ sitting in total darkness inside your skull builds a world every night that is often impossible. And while you're inside it, the part of you that would normally notice impossibility is switched off. Not gone. Switched off. It comes back in the morning, and when it comes back, it runs the math on what you just experienced and reports. That was absurd. But during the dream itself, no one was home to run that math. You lived through absurdity without noticing it was absurdity. Except sometimes, in some people, on some nights, someone is home. A recognition arrives from inside the dream. Wait, I'm asleep. This is a dream. And the dream doesn't end. You don't wake up. But the part of you that runs the reality check has come back online, partially briefly in the middle of REM sleep, in a brain that every measurement we can take says should not be capable of running it. You stay in the dream. You know you're in the dream. Some people on some nights can decide what to do next. They turn deliberately to look at something. They try to fly on purpose. They try to find someone they have been missing. It's called lucid dreaming, and for 50 years, the mainstream of sleep science did not believe it was real. The reasoning was simple. Consciousness, by definition, ended at sleep onset. A sleeping person could not know they were asleep. Every report that claimed otherwise could be explained as a confabulation on waking, or as a brief micro-arousal the dreamer had mistaken for a lucid state. The accounts accumulated, from ancient Greece, from medieval monasteries, from modern dream journals, and science politely set them aside. Then, on a spring morning in 1975, in a sleep laboratory in northern England, a sleeping man sent a signal out of his dream. Not through speech, not through movement, through his eyes, in a pattern he and his collaborator had agreed on weeks earlier, deliberately executed from inside REM sleep by a brain that was, by every definition the field had at the time, not supposed to be capable of deliberation at all. The chart paper recorded it, and the boundary between waking and dreaming, which had always been treated as a wall, turned out to have a door in it. That door, and what has been found on both sides of it since, is what tonight is about. Before we begin, a small favor. If what you're listening to feels worth being made, the subscribe button does more for a channel like this than almost anything else. And in the comments, I'd like to know something. Have you ever, in any dream you remember clearly, realized from inside that you were dreaming? What did you do? What did it feel like? I read the answers, and I find them more interesting than almost any data in this field. Now, if you're comfortable, get a little more comfortable. Your jaw is probably tighter than it needs to be. Your shoulders too. Your breathing will lengthen on its own over the next few minutes. You don't have to help it. The door was opened by two men who never met, working on opposite sides of the Atlantic, both asking the same strange question at the same strange time. One of them is the one whose name you know. The other, the one who did it first, is the one whose name you probably don't. Alan Worsley was not a scientist. He was a graduate student in psychology at the University of Hull, quiet, bookish, in his late 20s, and he had known since childhood that he could, on certain nights, recognize his dreams for what they were. He had no name for this ability. He had never met anyone else who described the same thing. When he read about rapid eye movement sleep as an undergraduate, the question formed in him almost immediately. If the dreaming brain produced eye movements, and the eye muscles were among the few not paralyzed during REM, then in principle a dreamer ought to be able to signal out, not through the mouth, not through the hands, through the eyes. He brought the idea to Keith Hearn in the autumn of 1974. Hearn was working on his doctoral research and had been looking for a way to separate the lucid dream experience, which people had been reporting for at least 2,000 years, going back to Aristotle, from the possibility that the reports were confabulated after the fact, or that they came from brief, unnoticed awakenings, or that they were simply a form of imagination mistakenly labeled as sleep. The eye signal method, if it worked, would solve all three problems at once. The signals would have to originate in verified REM sleep on the polygraph, with muscle atonia confirming that the body was paralyzed and the brain confirming that the dreamer had not woken. If a person could do that, there would be nothing left to argue about. Hearn's supervisors at Hull were, by his own later account, not enthusiastic. Sleep science in the mid-1970s was a field that had just begun to find its footing under researchers like William Dement at Stanford and Alan Rechtschaffen at Chicago, and even the most rigorous work was still sometimes regarded with the kind of suspicion that clings to any science that studies the inside of a sleeping head. Proposing to investigate consciousness during dreaming, when the prevailing view held that consciousness itself ceased at sleep onset, was the sort of thing a young researcher was advised to avoid if he wanted a career. Hearn did it anyway. Worsley agreed to be the subject. The two of them set up the protocol, rehearsed the signal, and began the long, patient work of waiting for a lucid dream to occur under the right conditions. Most of what they did was waiting. A person cannot summon a lucid dream on command. This was true in 1975, and, as we'll see, it's still mostly true now. And so Worsley would come in, sleep in the lab, wake up without having become lucid, and go home. It took weeks. The first near success was the one I described earlier, the one where Hearn had disconnected the electrodes minutes too soon. The second attempt, on the morning of April 12th, is the one where everything worked. What makes the moment worth dwelling on is not just that it succeeded, it's what Hearn said he felt, because his description, decades later, still reads like the most honest account anyone has given of what a genuinely new finding feels like from the inside. He said the chart paper simply began to produce something that had never existed on a chart paper before. A message from a sleeping person. Intentional, structured, unambiguous. In his memory, the experience had nothing of the dramatic quality that scientific breakthroughs are supposed to have in the retelling. It was quiet. The chart moved. He recognized what he was seeing, and the recognition for a long moment felt less like the end of an experiment and more like the beginning of contact. Here is the part of the story that gets told less often. Hearn did what a scientist does with a finding of this size. He wrote to other laboratories. In September 1975, 5 months after the recording, he sent letters describing his results to Alan Rechtschaffen at the University of Chicago and to William Dement at Stanford, both of whom were, at that point, the most senior figures in the young field of sleep research. He explained what he and Worsley had done. He explained what the chart showed. He asked, in effect, whether they had seen anything similar and whether his method might be worth pursuing more broadly. Dement received the letter. He also had a graduate student in his laboratory who was, at that same moment, trying to work out how to study lucid dreaming. That student's name was Stephen LaBerge, and in the story most neuroscience textbooks tell, LaBerge is the person who proved that lucid dreaming was real. He is the person the channel titles are named after. He is the founder of the Lucidity Institute. He is the author of the book, Lucid Dreaming, that introduced most of the English-speaking world to the phenomenon. He is, in the version of this story most people have heard, where this field begins. He is not where it begins. LaBerge's own first verified lucid dream signal, produced in the Stanford sleep laboratory using essentially the method Hearn had described in his letter, occurred on January 13, 1978, nearly 3 full years after Worsley's. By that point, Hearn had already presented his findings at an academic conference in 1977, had completed his doctoral thesis on the subject at Liverpool University, and had been interviewed about his work on British television. His publication record, however, ran through journals of the Society for Psychical Research, the British body that investigates claims of the paranormal and which, for complicated historical reasons, had long been one of the few venues willing to publish rigorous empirical work on unusual states of consciousness. Those journals did not circulate widely in mainstream neuroscience. LaBerge's work, by contrast, appeared in Perceptual and Motor Skills in 1980, a conventional psychology journal, and carried the Stanford name, and was picked up quickly by the field. This is how careers and credit get assigned in science, and it's worth being honest about it. LaBerge's research was meticulous. His replication across multiple trained subjects was more extensive than Hearn's. His development of the specific induction technique we'll look at in a few minutes was his own original contribution. He earned a great deal of what he is remembered for. But the priority, the fact that someone in a British sleep lab with a willing subject and a polygraph and a great deal of patience had already done it in 1975, is part of the record, and it's the part that most popular accounts leave out. Hearn, who is still alive, still works on dreams, and still occasionally gives interviews in which he is described, with some accuracy, as the man who first proved lucid dreaming and then watched someone else get most of the credit for it. The question of why this matters, beyond a kind of historical fairness, is the question that opens the rest of our subject. If the first demonstration of lucid dreaming was what Hearn said it was, contact from inside a dream, a signal intentionally sent by a sleeping brain, then the real scientific problem is not whether the signal happened. It's what kind of brain produces such a signal. What state, specifically, is a dreamer in when they become aware they are dreaming? What, in that moment, has switched on? What has stayed off? Hearn could demonstrate that the event occurred. He could not yet show what was happening inside Worsley's skull while it did. That question, the neurological one, the mechanism, the circuits, needed tools that would not arrive in sleep research for another 2 decades. As you listen to this now, your own brain is doing something that Worsley's brain was doing that April morning in 1975. It is moving through the long, slow cycle of relaxation that precedes REM sleep. The muscles around your jaw and shoulders are letting go of tension they have been holding all day. Your breathing is beginning to lengthen. The part of your cortex that has been running your attention, the thinking part, the planning part, the part that decides what to focus on, is starting, paragraph by paragraph, to loosen its grip. You're not asleep yet. You may not be sleep-bound tonight for another hour, but the machinery that will eventually take you there is right now, turning on in the background, slow and patient and indifferent to what you choose to do about it. 49 years ago, in a sleep laboratory in northern England, a man named Alan Worsley went through that same descent, and at the bottom of it, for reasons we are only beginning to understand, he came back up part way. Not all the way, enough to remember the task, enough to move his eyes, enough to tell another person by the only means available to a sleeping body that he was there. The question of how he did it, the question of what, in that brain, allowed the partial return, is the question the next hour and a half is built around. Imagine for a moment that you decide right now, while you're awake, to move your eyes in a deliberate left-right pattern. You can do it without thinking. The impulse forms in some part of your cortex that plans voluntary movement. The signal travels down through the brainstem nuclei that control the extraocular muscles, and the muscles contract, and your eyes move. The whole sequence takes a few hundred milliseconds and you barely notice any of it, because voluntary motor control is one of the things your brain does most effortlessly when it's awake. Now imagine making the same decision while you're asleep, not the muscles moving on their own, the way they do during REM. Those saccades are generated by the brainstem and have nothing to do with intention. Imagine a deliberate decision formed in a sleeping brain, carried down the same motor pathways, producing the same observable pattern on a polygraph that you would produce while awake. Imagine, in other words, that a sleeping person decides something and the waking world can see the decision happen. This is what Stephen LaBerge did to himself in the Stanford Sleep Laboratory on the night of January 12, 1978, going into the early morning hours of the 13th. He was a graduate student in psychophysiology, working under William Dement. He had been training himself for months. He was also, by his own account, the most cooperative subject he could find, which is why he used himself. The setup was a more thorough version of what Hearn had used in Hull, and the difference mattered. LaBerge was wired for full polysomnography, electroencephalography to read his brainwaves, electrooculography to read his eye movements, and electromyography to read the tone in his chin muscles. The EMG was the critical piece. During REM sleep, the postural muscles of the body go into a state of near-complete paralysis called atonia, produced by inhibitory signals from the brainstem that prevent the sleeper from physically acting out the dream. If LaBerge was awake, even briefly, his chin EMG would show muscle tone returning. If he was in any of the non-REM stages, his brainwaves would show the slow, high-amplitude patterns characteristic of those stages. The only state in which you see REM characteristic brainwaves, complete muscle atonia, and rapid eye movements all at once is REM sleep. That particular combination cannot be faked, and it cannot be produced by brief awakenings. If the eye signals arrived under that specific configuration, they had to be coming from a dreaming, paralyzed, asleep brain. They did. On that first successful night, LaBerge became lucid inside a dream, remembered the task he had set for himself before bed, and executed the signal. The polygraph recorded it. In the years that followed, he repeated the experiment with other trained subjects, 5 of them, eventually all of whom produced verified lucid dream signals under the same conditions. The paper describing this work was published in Perceptual and Motor Skills in 1981, and it remains one of the foundational citations in the field. There is a piece of this history that is worth telling plainly because it illustrates something about how science works. Before Perceptual and Motor Skills accepted the paper, LaBerge submitted his findings to 2 more prestigious journals, Science and Nature. Science rejected it after a review in which one of the referees, according to LaBerge's later account, argued that it was simply impossible for a person to be conscious inside a dream. And therefore, whatever LaBerge had recorded must be something other than what he claimed. The referee did not dispute the polygraph data. The referee disputed the interpretation on theoretical grounds, which is to say, on the grounds of prior conviction. Nature did not send the paper for review at all. The editors wrote back to say that the topic was, and I'm quoting from the editorial letter, not of sufficient general interest. This is a recurring feature of the history of consciousness research, and it's worth noticing. The most interesting findings in this field have often been the ones that could not, at first, pass through the filters that peer review uses to protect science from low-quality work. Those filters work well for most questions. They work badly for questions where the underlying phenomenon is so far outside the current theoretical frame that referees cannot tell the difference between a genuine anomaly and a methodological error. What saves such findings in the long run is replication, the slow accumulation of further evidence from other laboratories, which eventually either confirms the original or quietly buries it. In this case, the evidence accumulated. The more durable contribution LaBerge made, though, was not the verification method itself. That had, as we've seen, already been developed in Hull. His original contribution was a practical one. After years of recording his own lucid dreams, he had noticed that the frequency of them was strongly affected by what he did before falling asleep, specifically by what he intended to remember once he was inside a dream. The technique he developed is called mnemonic induction of lucid dreams, which is usually shortened in the literature and in the amateur community that has formed around this topic to mild. The name is slightly misleading because the word mnemonic makes it sound like a memory trick. What it really is a specific use of something called prospective memory, the ability to remember to perform an action at a future time when a future cue arrives. Prospective memory is what lets you remember at 10 in the morning to pick up milk at the store on the way home that evening. It is not the same system that stores facts or past experiences. It is a forward-oriented system, anchored in the anterior prefrontal cortex, and it works by laying down an intention that lies dormant until a triggering condition activates it. Mild applies this machinery to the dream state. The practitioner wakes during the night, usually after about 5 hours of sleep, which is when REM periods are longest and dream recall is strongest. They spend a few minutes recalling whatever dream they had just been in. Then, while falling back asleep, they rehearse a specific intention that the next time they are dreaming, they will remember that they are dreaming. And they pair this intention with a mental image of themselves inside a dream, noticing it. The pairing is the critical part. The intention by itself is easily lost. The intention anchored to a vivid image is, on some nights, remembered. And when it's remembered, when the dreamer finds themselves inside a dream and the prospective memory fires, producing the thought this is a dream, lucidity follows. In LaBerge's own data, the effect was substantial. Before he began using any induction technique, he had, on average, slightly less than one lucid dream per month, consistent with what researchers have since found in the general population. With autosuggestion alone, the rate climbed to around 5 per month. With mild, it rose to 21 per month, with some nights producing as many as 4. These were his own numbers on himself over a 3-year period, and the effect has since been replicated in larger samples. A 2017 study out of the University of Adelaide, running the technique on 169 participants for a single week, found that combining mild with the wake back to bed method produced lucid dreams in about 17% of the group over that week. Not a large number in absolute terms, but a meaningful increase over the near zero baseline you see without any training at all. What's interesting about mild, when you look at it from the perspective of the brain, is what it implies about the system that produces lucid dreaming in the first place. Prospective memory is, in effect, a bookmark, a note left for your future self, to be opened when a certain condition obtains. The condition, in this case, is the state of being inside a dream. For the bookmark to work, something in the dreaming brain has to be capable of recognizing that condition when it arrives and of retrieving the note. That recognition is not automatic. Most nights, for most people, the dreaming brain encounters absurdity after absurdity and fails to notice any of it. The condition is present. The recognition never fires. Which raises the question that the rest of this is built around. What, specifically, has to change inside the brain for the recognition to fire? What circuit, asleep in most dreams, is the one that, on the nights when mild works, briefly switches back on? The technique tells you how to set the bookmark. It does not tell you what opens the book. That question takes us into the architecture of REM sleep itself, into the specific anatomy of what your brain does and does not do while it's dreaming. The pieces have been in the literature since the mid-1990s, lying quietly in the PET imaging studies that first mapped the dreaming brain at regional resolution. Tonight, as you drift, you're carrying that architecture with you. Every cycle you pass through over the next 8 hours will bring specific parts of your cortex online and take others offline. in a sequence that is older than language and more consistent than almost anything else your brain does. The sequence is what we're going to look at now. It's also, quietly, the thing that is already beginning to happen. Somewhere in the last 40 minutes, while you've been listening, your brain has passed through the first several stages of a process it runs every night with almost no variation. The muscles of your face and neck are a little softer than they were when we started. Your heart rate is slightly lower. The large-scale electrical rhythm of your cortex, if I could put a sensor on your scalp right now, would already be shifting toward the slower frequencies that characterize the edge of sleep. None of this is under your control. Some of it is influenced by what you do, whether you're lying down, whether the room is dark, whether you've eaten recently. But the underlying machinery is running regardless. It was running in Alan Worsley in 1975. It will be running in you tonight. It has been running in every human being who has ever lived, every mammal who has ever lived, and in something functionally similar across most of the vertebrate line going back several 100 million years. What you're about to enter, assuming tonight goes roughly like most nights, is a cycle. Sleep is not a single state. It is a sequence of states, 4 or 5 of them depending on how you count, repeating across the night in loops of roughly 90 minutes each. The first loop begins with a gradual descent through the non-REM stages: light sleep, deeper sleep, the slow wave sleep at the bottom where the cortex falls into its most synchronized, most coordinated rhythm of the entire 24-hour cycle. Then, about 90 minutes after you first lose consciousness, something changes. The rhythms speed up, the muscles of the body go almost completely limp. The eyes, under closed lids, begin to move in the rapid, darting saccades that give this stage its name. And inside the sleeping brain, something begins to happen that does not happen during any of the other stages. You begin to dream. Rapid eye movement sleep was discovered in 1953, almost by accident, by a graduate student named Eugene Aserinsky, who was working in the laboratory of Nathaniel Kleitman at the University of Chicago. Aserinsky had been assigned what most of his colleagues considered a boring task: recording the eye movements of sleeping subjects through the night, mostly to see whether children showed different patterns than adults. He had set up the recording equipment on his 8-year-old son, Armand, and one night, watching the pens of the polygraph draw their slow, meandering lines, he saw something he hadn't expected. The pens began to move quickly. The eye muscles under the sleeping boy's eyelids were firing in rapid bursts. Aserinsky assumed, at first, that the boy had woken up. He went upstairs to check. Armand was sound asleep. What Aserinsky had discovered was that sleep was not the uniform state of reduced activity that the field had been treating it as for decades. Something else was happening. Something that produced, periodically, patterns of brain and eye activity almost indistinguishable from wakefulness, embedded inside a body that was demonstrably unconscious. When he and Kleitman began waking subjects during those periods, they discovered that the subjects almost always reported having been dreaming. When they woke them from the quieter stages of sleep, dream reports were much rarer. REM was the dreaming stage. It had been running in every sleeping person they had ever studied, roughly every 90 minutes, 4 or 5 times a night, and nobody had noticed. The anatomy of REM, once researchers began to look at it with better tools, turned out to be strange. In 1996, a research group led by Pierre Maquet at the University of Liège used positron emission tomography, which tracks blood flow as a measure of neural activity, to map which parts of the brain were working during REM and which were not. The pattern was unlike anything they had expected. Some areas of the cortex were firing at rates comparable to full wakefulness. The visual cortices, the motor areas, the limbic structures that handle emotion, the anterior cingulate, the amygdala. These are the parts of the brain that generate the rich, vivid, emotionally intense content of dreams. They were not resting. They were not, in any meaningful sense, asleep, but other regions were nearly silent. The most striking of these was a large patch of frontal cortex called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a region that sits behind the upper forehead, on each side, running from roughly the hairline back toward the crown. You have two of them, one on each hemisphere. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is one of the most recently evolved structures in the human brain, and it is also one of the most distinctive. It is the region most associated with what cognitive scientists call executive function, deliberate decision-making, planning, holding things in working memory, evaluating whether what you're thinking makes sense, and most importantly for our purposes, metacognition, the capacity to notice what you are thinking while you are thinking it. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the part of you that can step back from your own thoughts and ask whether they are reasonable. It is the part that runs the test 100 times a day of, does this make sense? It is the part that, while you are awake, separates you from a dreamer. During REM sleep, it is almost completely offline. A follow-up study by Alan Worsley and his colleagues at the National Institutes of Health, published a year after Mackay's, confirmed the pattern in a larger sample and traced it further. The deactivation covered the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, the precuneus, and parts of the inferior parietal lobe, a network of regions that, when working together during wakefulness, support the specific experience of being a self-aware, reality-monitoring, contextually grounded person. All of them go quiet together during REM, and underneath that quieting, the emotional and sensory regions roar. This asymmetry is the key to understanding why dreams are the way they are. The parts of your brain that generate vivid imagery and powerful emotion are fully active while you dream, which is why dreams feel as real as they do. The parts that would normally ask, wait, does this make sense, are offline, which is why dreams are accepted from inside as though they do. You have a conversation with your dead grandmother. You are suddenly in a house that is both your childhood home and a train station. You are flying, or late for an exam you haven't studied for, or walking naked through a building you half recognize. None of this strikes you as odd while it's happening. The system that would register it as odd is not running. It will be running again in a few hours when you wake, and at that point, if you remember the dream at all, you'll notice its strangeness with the full force of an intact prefrontal cortex. But inside the dream itself, the oddness is simply not available to you. There is no one home to notice. The question this opens, and the question that drives everything we're going to look at over the next hour, is what it takes to bring that system partially back online without ending the dream. Because lucid dreaming, as Hearn and LaBerge showed, is precisely that, a dream in which the metacognitive machinery has, for reasons researchers are still working out, briefly switched on. Not all the way, not enough to wake the dreamer, just enough for the recognition to fire, this is a dream, and for some fraction of voluntary control to return. The people who experience this regularly describe it as a strange hybrid. The dream feels as vivid as any other dream, but there is, suddenly, a watcher inside it. Someone paying attention, someone asking the question that, in ordinary dreams, no one is there to ask. What the neuroscience of the last 15 years has been trying to figure out is what, exactly, is different in the brain during those moments. The honest answer is that we know less than the popular accounts usually admit. We have preliminary evidence from a small number of imaging studies, most of them single-subject case reports, because lucid dreams are rare enough that getting a trained lucid dreamer to produce one on demand inside an MRI scanner is one of the harder problems in sleep research. What those studies suggest, and suggest is the right word, is that during lucid moments in REM, certain parts of the prefrontal and parietal cortex that are normally deactivated begin to light up again. Not to the levels they show during waking, somewhere in between. A partial reactivation, localized, lasting as long as the lucidity lasts, fading when the dreamer loses it. There is a pattern in this research that will come up repeatedly, and it's worth naming now. Findings in the neuroscience of lucid dreaming have a tendency to appear striking, get widely cited, and then, on closer examination, turn out to be more complicated than they first looked. One of the most famous early findings in the field, an EEG signature that was claimed for more than a decade to be the distinctive neural mark of lucid awareness, did not survive the reanalysis that better methods eventually permitted. This is not, I want to say clearly, a failure of the science. It is the science working. It is also the reason that the claims that have survived scrutiny, modest as some of them are, deserve more trust than the headline versions you see in popular coverage. We'll come to the story of that particular finding and what replaced it in its own time. For now, the architecture is enough. Every night, all over the world, billions of sleeping brains cycle through the same sequence. The cortex descends through its slower rhythms. The body relaxes. About 90 minutes in, the brainstem fires the signal that begins REM, and the cortex lights up again. Most of it, but not all. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex stays quiet. The posterior cingulate stays quiet. The parietal regions that support reality monitoring stay quiet. Into that pattern of selective silence, the dream arrives, felt with full sensory force, unchallenged by any internal voice asking whether it is real. Hundreds of millions of humans are in that exact configuration at this moment. Most will not become lucid tonight. A small fraction will. None of them will know in advance which group they will be in. If the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is offline during REM sleep, and if that is the reason dreams feel normal from inside, then the question that follows is not a difficult one to form, but it is genuinely difficult to answer. What, on the rare nights when a dream turns lucid, brings that region back? Something is firing. Something is reaching into a dreaming brain and switching a network back on that the sleeping brain had very purposefully shut down. For most of the history of this field, that something has had to be inferred from behavior alone, because the tools for watching it directly did not exist. By the late 2000s, that had started to change. The researcher who pushed furthest into the problem is a German neuroscientist named Martin Dressler, who was, at the time, working at the Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry in Munich. Dressler had been studying the neuroscience of sleep and dreaming since the middle of his doctoral work, and he had a particular interest in the specific phenomenon of lucid dreaming, partly because of its theoretical importance, partly because, like many people drawn to this field, he was a lucid dreamer himself. What he wanted to do, in the summer of 2011, was something no one had previously managed: get a trained lucid dreamer into an MRI scanner, have them fall asleep, have them produce a verified lucid dream under the scanner, and record which parts of the brain were active while it happened. The practical difficulties of this were considerable. Falling asleep inside a magnetic resonance scanner is hard. The machine is loud. The radio frequency pulses and gradient coils produce a rhythmic banging that is often compared to a pneumatic drill, and the subject has to lie still, head immobilized, wired up with electrodes that must not move. Most people cannot sleep in that environment at all. The few who can rarely reach REM, because REM is the lightest stage of sleep and the most easily disrupted. And of the subjects who do reach REM, only a small fraction will become lucid on any given night. Dressler recruited 4 experienced lucid dreamers, people who had been practicing the skill for between 4 and 20 years, and over the course of 15 nights of recording, he watched and waited. He got 2 lucid episodes, both from the same subject. 2 episodes, about 50 seconds each, out of 15 full nights of attempted sleep in a functional MRI scanner. That is the sample size of the study that remains, more than a decade later, the foundational fMRI investigation of lucid dreaming. When Dressler tells the story, he does not hide the ratio. He describes it as a kind of endurance test, A series of long nights in the scanner control room, most of which produced nothing usable, and a handful of which produced the most interesting data the field has ever had on what a lucid brain looks like from the inside. When the lucidity did occur and the subjects signaled it the way LaBerge's subjects had, with the prearranged pattern of rapid eye movements that the scanner could detect through the electrooculogram channels, the researchers could isolate those 50-second windows and compare the brain activity inside them to the brain activity in the surrounding non-lucid REM. The difference was specific. Regions that had been quiet during ordinary dreaming were now firing. The anterior prefrontal cortex at the very front of the frontal lobe just behind the forehead came up. The precuneus, deep in the parietal cortex, came up. The lateral parietal regions around what anatomists call the angular gyrus came up. The lateral temporal cortex came up. Taken together, these are regions involved in self-referential processing, in evaluating one's own mental states, in the kind of abstract self-awareness that lets a person ask what kind of mental state they are in. During ordinary REM, that network sits mostly dark. During the 50 seconds of lucidity, it lit up. Not to full waking levels, but substantially above its non-lucid baseline. And when the dreamer lost the lucidity and the subject's report after waking confirmed that they had slipped back into a non-lucid state, the network dimmed again. What Dressler's data shows, in other words, is that lucid dreaming is not a micro-awakening. It is not a brief interruption of sleep. It is a real, sustained reconfiguration of brain activity during REM itself. The sleeping brain can, on certain nights and for certain people, produce a state in which part of the prefrontal parietal network that supports self-awareness comes back online, while the rest of the sleeping brain continues to sleep. The dreamer stays in the dream. The visual cortex keeps generating imagery. The muscles stay paralyzed. The brainstem keeps firing the REM-generating signals. But in the frontal and parietal cortex, something specific happens. A partial return, localized, temporary, and consistent across the 2 episodes the scanner captured. A year earlier, working with near-infrared spectroscopy rather than fMRI, Dressler's group had produced another piece of evidence that, if you've ever wondered whether dreams involve the body or just a kind of internal movie, is worth pausing on. They had asked their lucid subjects to clench a fist inside the dream, the left fist, then the right, with eye movement signals marking each switch. When the dreamer dreamt the left hand clenching, the area of the motor cortex that controls the left hand activated. When the dreamer switched to the right hand, the corresponding motor area lit up on the opposite side. The dreamer was not physically moving. The body, paralyzed by REM atonia, could not have produced any actual hand movement, but the brain was behaving as though the hand were moving. The motor plan was being executed. It was simply being prevented by the brainstem's inhibitory signals from reaching the muscles. This finding opens something that is philosophically strange in a way that is easy to miss. When you dream about walking across a room, the walking planning parts of your motor cortex are running the plan for walking across a room. When you dream about speaking, the speech planning areas are running the plan for speech. The dream is not a movie playing in front of you. It is, at the neural level, a set of activations distributed across the same circuitry that produces the waking versions of those activities. The body is locked out. The brain is not. There is another line of evidence that matters here, and it comes from looking not at lucid dreamers during lucid moments, but at lucid dreamers during their waking lives. A 2018 study from Benjamin Baird's laboratory at the University of Wisconsin compared the brains of 14 people who reported lucid dreams at least 3 times per week, which is extraordinarily frequent, well above what most lucid dreamers ever achieve, with a matched control group who reported 1 or fewer lucid dreams per year. When they looked at resting state functional connectivity in these 2 groups, meaning the baseline patterns of coordination between different brain regions that are present even when people are not doing any particular task, they found a difference. In the frequent lucid dreamers, the left anterior prefrontal cortex showed stronger intrinsic connectivity with the angular gyrus and nearby temporoparietal regions. the same network that, in Dressler's work, lit up during lucid moments. What that suggests is that some of the capacity for lucid dreaming may be a trait present in the brain even when the person is not asleep. The network that supports it is simply better connected in some brains than in others. Whether this is congenital or whether it is the result of years of lucid dreaming practice quietly rewiring the network is a question the current data cannot resolve. Both are plausible. It may be both. None of this tells us what triggers the activation on any given night. That question remains open. What the imaging has established is that something is being triggered, a specific network, in specific places, for specific and measurable durations, and that the triggering is what produces the subjective experience of recognizing inside a dream that you are dreaming. The circuit is real. The circuit is mapped. What makes it fire on some nights and not others is still being worked out. Some of the work being done on that question involves induction techniques of the kind LaBerge developed. Cognitive preparations designed to load the prefrontal parietal network before sleep, in the hope that it will remain loadable inside the dream. Some of it involves pharmacological approaches, which we'll come to, which try to tilt the neurochemistry of REM in ways that make the network easier to reactivate. And some of it, the most direct, the most causally clean, the strangest of the approaches, involves reaching into the sleeping brain from outside with electrical current and trying to nudge the network back on by brute physics. That last approach produced in 2014 one of the most striking single experiments in the modern history of sleep science. Tonight, between now and when you finally drift off, your prefrontal cortex will perform its usual dance. Bright during the waking moments that separate sleep cycles, dark during the deep slow wave phases, selectively dark during the REM periods when dreams will begin to form. On any of those REM periods, for reasons researchers cannot yet predict in any individual case, the circuit may flicker, or it may not. The odds for most people are very long, but they are not zero. Picture a man in his late 30s lying in a sleep laboratory in Frankfurt, Germany in the autumn of 2012. His name has been kept private in the published record, but the basic facts of what was done to him are all on paper. He is asleep. He is in REM. Small adhesive electrodes have been placed on his scalp, positioned over the frontal cortex. The electrodes are not for recording, they are for delivering. Running through them at very low intensity, 2 milliamps, barely enough to tingle if you felt it on your skin, is an alternating electrical current oscillating at 40 cycles per second. He has no way of knowing the current is there. It is too weak to wake him, too diffuse to stimulate any specific neuron, and too brief, at 30 seconds of application, to change the underlying chemistry of his brain. All it does is gently impose a rhythm on the local field, a slight, coherent oscillation in the frontal cortex at a frequency the sleeping brain does not normally produce in that region. What happens next, in his dream, is what the experiment was designed to test. When he wakes, he reports what happened. A substantial fraction of the people in his condition, on the night they received the 40 Hz current, describe something that did not happen on the control nights when the current was either absent or delivered at a different frequency. They describe recognizing inside the dream that they were dreaming. Some of them describe gaining a small amount of voluntary control. Some describe the more common, partial version of the experience. The sense of watching the dream as a dream, of understanding its status, without necessarily being able to act on that understanding. The effect was not universal, it was not reliable in every subject on every trial, but across a group of 27 participants, on the 40 Hz condition and on a 25 Hz condition, the effect was statistically real. Other frequencies, 2 Hz, 6, 12, 70, 100, produced nothing. The experiment was led by a researcher named Ursula Voss based at the University of Frankfurt, and her findings were published in 2014 in Nature Neuroscience. What made the paper remarkable at the time, and what has made it one of the most widely cited pieces of work in the lucid dreaming literature, is the nature of the causal claim it seemed to make. Previous research had established that lucid dreaming was associated with increased activity in the higher frequency bands of the EEG, activity in the gamma range, roughly 30 to 40 Hz, in the frontal cortex. That association had been known since work by the same research group 5 years earlier, which we'll come back to in a few minutes. What Voss's 2014 paper did was flip the direction of the claim. If you imposed activity in the gamma range on a dreaming brain, you could, in a meaningful fraction of cases, produce the subjective experience of lucidity. Not just correlation, something closer to causation. The technique Voss used is called transcranial alternating current stimulation, usually abbreviated TACS, and it's worth understanding what it actually does because the popular descriptions of this technology tend to overstate it. It does not, contrary to some accounts, turn on lucid dreaming. It does not stimulate specific neurons. What it does is apply a weak rhythmic electric field across a region of the scalp, and that field gently pushes the local neural population toward firing in synchrony with the imposed frequency. Neurons that were already near their firing threshold are slightly more likely to fire in phase with the current. Neurons that were far from threshold are unaffected. The net result is a small but measurable increase in the coherence of oscillatory activity in the targeted region at the targeted frequency. It is a nudge, not a command. When that nudge is applied to frontal cortex at gamma frequencies during REM sleep, the specific circumstance of Voss's experiment, the nudge appears to be enough, in some cases, to help the prefrontal parietal network reach the configuration that produces lucidity. Think of it the way you might think about priming a pump. The machinery is already there. The neural circuits for metacognition are intact. They are simply quieted by the normal pharmacology of REM. The imposed gamma activity does not force them back online. It raises the baseline noise in the system in a way that makes their spontaneous reactivation more probable. Whether a given subject crosses the threshold on a given night depends on many other factors. How deep the REM is, how close the relevant circuits were to firing already, how suggestible the subject is, what they were dreaming about when the current was applied. The effect is probabilistic, not deterministic. This finding, when it came out, was genuinely surprising, and it's worth being careful about what it does and does not show. What it shows is that the causal link between gamma band frontal activity and lucid awareness, which had been suggested by earlier correlational studies, is at least partially supported by interventional data. If you impose the activity, you increase the lucidity. That is a stronger kind of evidence than correlation alone, and it was taken by many researchers, Voss among them, as a meaningful step forward. What the 2014 study does not show, and what the broader literature has still not established with confidence, is that frontal gamma is the unique or even the primary neural signature of lucid dreaming. That is a separate claim about the underlying electrophysiology rather than the effect of stimulation, and the status of that claim has become more complicated over the last few years in ways we'll need to get into. There is also a practical qualification that rarely makes it into popular descriptions of this work. The TACS technique, applied in the way Voss applied it, requires laboratory conditions, a sleep facility with full polysomnography, trained technicians monitoring the sleep stages in real time so the current can be delivered precisely during REM, and electrode placement that has to be verified against the subject's individual anatomy. It is not, despite occasional claims to the contrary, something that can be reliably replicated with over-the-counter consumer devices marketed for this purpose. Those devices, when tested, have generally failed to produce the effect, for reasons that probably include imprecise timing, insufficient current, and poor electrode positioning. If you have read, as some listeners probably have, that you can buy a headband that induces lucid dreams through frontal stimulation. The honest assessment is that the underlying science is real, but the consumer translation of it has so far not worked. What the Voss finding did accomplish, scientifically, was to put lucid dreaming firmly into the category of brain states that could be influenced through controlled external intervention. It joined the cognitive techniques like mild, which operate on the prefrontal network through preparation and intention, and began to suggest a third category alongside cognitive and pharmacological methods. The direct electrical, the brute physics approach, reaching into a dreaming brain with current and asking it gently to reorganize itself. That the brain sometimes complied was, in its way, the most interesting thing about the whole experiment. A sleeping brain in REM is a system operating according to its own internal logic, disconnected from most external input, generating its own content, immune to most forms of interference. That a 40 Hz oscillation, applied with 2 milliamps through scalp electrodes, could reach into that system and tilt it toward a different configuration. This was, and remains, one of the clearer demonstrations of how thin the membrane is between a brain's internal states and the physical field it sits inside. Which brings us to the earlier finding that made Voss's 2014 study possible in the first place. The 2009 work that identified gamma activity in the frontal cortex as a marker of lucid awareness. That study, published in the journal Sleep, was itself remarkable when it appeared. It was the first time anyone had produced what looked like a clean, specific, high-frequency EEG signature of the lucid state. For more than a decade after it was published, it was cited in essentially every scientific paper, popular article and book about lucid dreaming as the neural signature of the phenomenon. It was the finding that made 40 Hz the number to watch. It was the finding that pointed Voss and her colleagues toward the stimulation frequency they later used. And it was the finding that, in 2022, did not survive a careful reanalysis by a different laboratory. What replaced it is a smaller, stranger, and more honest picture of what the sleeping brain is actually doing when it becomes aware of itself. That story, and what it tells us about how neuroscience corrects its own mistakes, is where the architecture of this begins to shift. As you lie there now, your own cortex is producing its own rhythms, alpha waves, slow and steady, as you relax into whatever position you've settled into, beginning to slow further as the first edges of sleep approach. No one is stimulating you, no current is being applied. Whatever shifts your brain makes tonight, it will make on its own terms, according to rhythms that have been running unchanged since long before there was any such thing as a laboratory or a machine to measure them. The natural version of this process is the one that produces most of the lucid dreams that have ever occurred. The laboratory versions, ingenious as they are only trying to understand what the natural version does by itself, most nights, for most people, entirely in the dark. If you trust a finding for 13 years, if it appears in every review paper, every textbook, every popular article, every documentary on the subject, what does it mean when a more careful analysis shows the finding was an artifact, not fraud, not negligence? Something more ordinary and, in its own way, more interesting. A signal that turned out to be coming from the wrong source, hidden inside data that had been processed according to the best practices of its time. The question matters because the history of lucid dreaming research contains exactly this kind of story, and it involves the very finding that, for most of the last decade, was treated as the clearest neural signature of the lucid state. The paper in question came out of the same German laboratory that later ran the 2014 stimulation study. Ursula Voss and her colleagues, working with J. Allen Hobson of Harvard, one of the most influential sleep researchers of the 20th century, the man whose activation synthesis theory had dominated dream science since the 1970s, published a study in the journal Sleep in 2009 that looked, at the time, like a genuine breakthrough. They had recorded 19-channel EEG from trained lucid dreamers across multiple nights, waited for the subjects to signal lucidity with the by-then standard eye movement pattern, and then compared the electrical activity during those lucid epochs against the activity during ordinary non-lucid REM in the same subjects. What they found was a spike in gamma band activity, specifically around 40 Hz, in the frontal and frontolateral regions of the cortex during the lucid moments. Gamma band activity is interesting because it has, for decades, been associated with certain features of waking consciousness: focused attention, binding of information across different cortical regions, meditation states in experienced practitioners. Seeing it appear in a dreaming brain, specifically in the frontal cortex, specifically during the moments when the dreamer was reporting awareness of the dream state, fit almost too neatly into the emerging picture of lucid dreaming as a hybrid, REM physiology underneath, waking-style metacognition layered on top. The finding was taken up immediately. It was cited in hundreds of subsequent papers. It became the shorthand account in popular science writing: lucid dreaming is REM plus frontal gamma. It was the basis for Voss's own 2014 stimulation work, which used 40 Hz as the target frequency, because that was the frequency her 2009 paper had identified as the signature of spontaneous lucidity. It entered the culture. If you read anything about lucid dreaming between 2010 and 2022, the odds are very good that somewhere in that text you encountered a version of the 40 Hz story. There was, during those 13 years, a quiet methodological problem sitting underneath the finding. EEG is an exquisitely sensitive technology. It measures electrical activity at the scalp down to fractions of a microvolt, but it is also notoriously vulnerable to contamination from non-neural sources. Muscle activity contaminates it, cardiac signals contaminate it, and, critically for REM sleep research, eye movements contaminate it. The fast saccadic movements that give REM its name produce their own electrical signatures, detectable across much of the frontal scalp, and those signatures overlap with the frequencies that EEG researchers care about. When you're looking for high-frequency activity in frontal electrodes during REM sleep, exactly the condition of the Voss study, you are looking at a signal that is almost certainly mixed with whatever the eye muscles are doing at the same moment. The field had developed procedures for removing eye movement artifacts from the signal, and the 2009 paper used the standard corrections that were considered adequate at the time. The question, which took more than a decade to be properly asked, was whether those standard corrections were adequate enough. In 2022, a group led by Benjamin Baird, the same researcher whose 2018 resting state study I mentioned earlier, went back to the question with better tools and a larger pooled data set aggregated from several laboratories. They applied more aggressive artifact cleaning than the 2009 analysis had used. They looked specifically at whether the frontal gamma signal survived when the eye movement contamination was more thoroughly removed. And they reported that, under proper cleaning, the distinctive 40 Hz frontolateral signature that Voss had identified in 2009 did not, in fact, appear. What had looked like a neural signal coming from the frontal cortex during lucid moments was, to a substantial degree, the electrical trace of the saccades themselves. The eyes were moving faster during lucid REM, something that is itself an interesting observation. And that movement was showing up in the frontal electrodes as apparent gamma activity. This result was confirmed in 2025 by a larger multi-laboratory analysis published in the Journal of Neuroscience, which used an even more sophisticated pre-processing pipeline, and again found no reliable frontal gamma signature of lucid dreaming once the saccadic contamination was properly accounted for. The same paper noted that one electrophysiological difference did survive replication, a reduction in delta band activity during lucid REM compared to ordinary REM, suggesting a shift toward shallower local sleep in the lucid state. But the headline finding that had dominated the field for 13 years was, essentially, gone. It is worth being precise about what this does and does not mean. It does not mean that lucid dreaming is unreal, or that the subjective reports are unreliable, or that the people who signaled from inside their dreams were doing anything other than what they said they were doing. The behavioral evidence for lucid dreaming, the eye movement signals verified across decades of research in multiple laboratories, remains some of the cleanest experimental data in all of sleep science. What the LaBerge 2022 finding shows is narrower. It shows that the particular EEG signature that researchers had pointed to as the neural correlate of lucidity was not what they had thought it was. The lucid state is still real. The brain activity that produces it is still being investigated. The specific claim about 40 Hz gamma as the marker of that state has simply not held up. And it is also worth saying something about what this history means for how we should think about neuroscience as a field. There is a temptation, when a finding like this gets overturned, to treat it as a kind of embarrassment, a moment of failure, evidence that the science cannot be trusted. I want to push against that reading because it misses what is actually happening. The 2009 paper was not sloppy. Voss and her colleagues used the standard methods of their time, drew reasonable conclusions from the data they had, and published their work in a serious journal that reviewed it according to serious standards. What happened between 2009 and 2022 is not that anyone failed. What happened is that the tools got better, the field accumulated more data, and a younger researcher with access to those improved tools looked at the question again and found that the earlier answer had been partly wrong. He published that finding. Other laboratories confirmed it. The textbooks will now update. This is, genuinely, what working science looks like. Most of the findings that appear in the headlines of science journalism are findings at the edge of what current methods can resolve, and a meaningful fraction of them will turn out, on closer inspection, to need revision. That is not a bug. It is the process by which the uncertain becomes certain, one careful reanalysis at a time. The findings that survive, the ones that hold up across decades and across multiple laboratories using increasingly refined techniques, are the ones that deserve the weight we eventually give them. The rest get corrected. What remains after the correction is more trustworthy than it was before. For lucid dreaming specifically, what survives in the current literature is a smaller and more honest picture than the 40 Hz story implied. We know from imaging work by Dressler and others that specific prefrontal and parietal regions reactivate during lucid moments in REM. We know from Baird's own resting state work that frequent lucid dreamers show distinctive connectivity patterns even while awake. We know from the 2014 stimulation study that externally imposing gamma frequency activity on the frontal cortex during REM can increase the likelihood of lucid experience, a finding that, because it rests on the causal effect of stimulation rather than the correlation between a specific EEG signature and a subjective state, is not undermined by the 2022 artifact analysis. The techniques that work still work. The preliminary map of which brain regions participate still holds. What has shifted is the claim about the particular electrical rhythm that was supposed to mark the state. That claim is gone. The science has not failed here. It has corrected itself, which is the thing it was built to do. And somewhere inside that correction, there is a quiet lesson about how much of what we believe, about anything, rests on assumptions we have not yet had the tools to check. The things you believe about your own mind tonight may be, in their way, versions of the 40 Hz story. Confident interpretations of signals whose source has not yet been properly traced. Most of them are probably right. Some of them, almost certainly, are not. Which ones is a question you will not, in this lifetime, fully answer. That is not a failure either. It is the condition of being a mind that is also the thing being studied. In In the winter of 1913, a Dutch psychiatrist named Frederik van Eden stood up in front of the Society for Psychical Research in London and read a paper he had been working on for most of his adult life. He was 52 years old. He had been keeping a detailed dream diary for more than 20 years, recording every dream he could remember in the morning, cataloguing them by type, looking for patterns. He had recorded, by his own count, more than 500 dreams of a particular kind, dreams in which he knew, while they were happening, that he was dreaming. The paper he read that evening proposed a name for them. He called them lucid dreams, and the word has stayed. What interests me about Van Eden's paper, more than a century later, is the definition he gave. He did not describe lucid dreaming as awareness added to a dream. He described it as, in his exact phrase, the reintegration of the psychic functions, the return to coordinated action of the mental capacities that ordinary dreaming fragments. In a lucid dream, he wrote, the sleeper remembers day life. The sleeper remembers their own condition. The sleeper reaches a state of reflective awareness and is able to direct their attention and to perform acts of what he called free volition. Notice what this definition is not doing. It is not saying that something new has been added to the dream. It is saying that something old has come back together. The machinery that produces continuous, coordinated, self-aware experience in waking life, a machinery that normally goes to pieces during sleep, has, for a few seconds or a few minutes, reassembled itself inside the dream. This is a different way of thinking about what lucid dreaming actually is, and it aligns, somewhat unexpectedly, with what the neuroscience we have been looking at has been finding for the last 15 years. The prefrontal parietal network that supports metacognition during waking life does not disappear during sleep. It does not stop existing. It is still there, wired the way it was when you went to bed, as ready to fire as it was an hour ago. What sleep does to it is put it into a specific, inhibited state, quieted by the cholinergic signaling that governs REM, quieted by the loss of the coordinating activity that normally comes from other waking networks, quieted by the absence of the external sensory input that, when you are awake, keeps that network continuously updated about what kind of situation it is in. During a lucid dream, that inhibition partially lifts. The network reassembles. The capacity that had been held offline comes back, and with it comes the subjective experience of being a self who is aware of being a self. Which raises a question that the science of this, as much of a science as it has become, cannot yet answer. What exactly is the self that comes back? The obvious answer is that the self is the person, the one who went to sleep, the one who dreamed, the one who woke up. But that answer glosses over something the neuroscience makes it harder to ignore. The sense of being a self is, itself, produced by specific brain activity. When that activity is suppressed, as it is during ordinary REM, the sense is not there. The dream continues without it. There is still something happening. Images are forming, emotions are arising, a story of some kind is unfolding. But there is no one inside the story evaluating whether the story makes sense. The dreamer is, in a precise sense, not present in their own dream. Some other process is running, producing the dream's content, but the witness who would ordinarily accompany that content is absent. And then, in a lucid moment, the witness returns. The same content continues. The same dream unfolds, but now there is someone inside it, noticing. Where was that someone for the previous 8 minutes? This is the question that philosophy of mind has been circling around for most of its modern history. And it is also the question that the neuroscience of consciousness has not yet found a way to formulate precisely enough to answer. The honest state of the field is something like this. We can measure the mechanism. We can trace the circuits that support self-awareness and map when they are firing and when they are quiet. We can intervene with current, with drugs, with cognitive training, and shift the probability that those circuits will engage. What we cannot do with any tool anyone has yet invented is detect from the outside, whether a particular configuration of neural activity is accompanied by subjective experience. The activity is public. The experience is the most private thing in the universe. And somehow, as far as anyone can tell, they are the same event, seen from different sides. I want to stay here for a moment, because this is the place where the questions we have been asking connect to something larger than the specific science of lucid dreaming. The experience of being you, the experience of hearing these words, of having whatever thoughts you are having as I say them, of being aware that you are lying or sitting somewhere in your own life, is produced by a system that goes offline every night and comes back online every morning without anyone, anywhere, fully understanding how. The offlineness is not a pause, it is a restructuring. The system that produces the experience of being you is taken apart and put back together roughly every 24 hours. And the thing that wakes up in the morning shares memories and personality and voice with the thing that went to sleep the night before, and seems, from inside, to be continuous with it. But the continuity may be an achievement of the mechanism rather than a property of the self. It is, at any rate, not something we know how to test. The philosopher who said that the self is what we are most sure of and least able to explain was not exaggerating. Every other scientific question has, in principle, a way of being approached from the outside. This one, so far, does not. Lucid dreaming gives us something we have never had before, which is a window into the exact moment when the capacity for self-reflection switches on inside a brain that is otherwise doing something else. What it does not give us, what nothing yet gives us, is access to what it is like, from the inside, to be the thing in which that switching is happening. The practical consequences of this, for how we think about the self, are harder to avoid than they first appear. If the self is what comes back during a lucid dream, then the self is not the dreamer who was there all along. The self is the capacity for reflection about the dreamer, which is a different thing. The dreamer is the production. The self is the audience that occasionally shows up to watch. For most of sleep, the theatre is empty. The show goes on anyway. And in the morning, when you wake and remember fragments of what happened, you are remembering a performance that was, for almost all of its run, unobserved by anyone, including, in a meaningful sense, by you. This is not a disturbing thought, at least not once you sit with it long enough. It is a reminder that the thing we call self is less uniform, less continuous, and more periodically reassembled than it feels from inside. The feeling of continuous selfhood is, in a way, one of the nervous system's more accomplished tricks. The trick works well enough that we rarely notice the seams. Lucid dreaming, when it occurs, is one of the few places where the seams become briefly visible, where a person notices, from inside the experience, that they are in a particular kind of mental state, and that the state has boundaries, and that outside the boundaries there is something else. A house with many rooms, most of them dark most of the time. A hallway you have been walking along, unaware that there were rooms on either side. A door opening, for a few minutes, onto a part of your own mind you had not, until that moment, realized was there. You are, right now, inside that house. The lights in most of the rooms are already lower than they were when this began. The hallway you have been walking along for the last hour is narrower than it was when you first stepped into it. Somewhere, in one of the rooms you are not currently in, something is beginning to happen. A reorganization of activity, a shift of rhythms, the first preparations for the descent into sleep. You are not being told about this. You are living it. The house is yours. The architecture was there before you learned its shape, and it will continue to be there long after you have stopped noticing it tonight. If a door opens, during the hours ahead, onto a room where a version of you is aware of being in a dream, that version is not a visitor. It is the same mind you have always been. It is just for those minutes, in a room you usually sleep through. Imagine taking a small tablet before bed, waking up 5 hours later, staying out of bed for half an hour, and then returning to sleep with the specific intention of recognizing your next dream as a dream. That is the experimental protocol for the most effective pharmacological method of inducing lucid dreams currently known to science. It is, at first glance, an absurd sentence. The idea that a pill could reach into the chemistry of a sleeping brain and change the probability of a particular kind of conscious experience sounds, when stated plainly, like the premise of a science fiction story. Until 2018, most serious neuroscientists would have been cautious about taking the claim at face value. A double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover trial published that year in the journal PLOS One changed that. The claim, it turned out, was correct. The tablet in question contains a substance called galantamine, which was originally isolated in the 1950s from the bulbs of the common snowdrop flower, and which has been prescribed for decades as a treatment for the cognitive symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Its pharmacological action is straightforward. The brain uses a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine to support, among other functions, attention, learning, and the electrical activity of REM sleep. Acetylcholine is ordinarily broken down shortly after it is released into the synapse by an enzyme called acetylcholine sterase. Galantamine inhibits that enzyme. With the enzyme slowed, acetylcholine accumulates in the synapses and stays active longer than it otherwise would. The net effect is an amplification of whatever acetylcholine-dependent processes are running at the moment the drug is circulating. During REM sleep, those processes include, among other things, the generation of the REM state itself. REM is, neurochemically, a cholinergic dominant state. The brainstem nuclei that launch each REM period do so through heavy acetylcholine release into the cortex, and the visual vividness and emotional intensity of dreams during REM are closely tied to that release. If you give a person galantamine before a period of expected REM, you are essentially turning up the volume on the chemistry that already produces dreaming. The REM periods become longer, more intense, more vivid. Dream recall increases, the content becomes more elaborate, and in some fraction of subjects, the prefrontal parietal network that supports self-awareness becomes more likely to fire inside the dream. The 2018 trial was designed to measure this last effect with the kind of rigor that the earlier pilot work, going back to the early 2000s, had not been able to provide. The research team, Stephen LaBerge, Kristen Lamarca, and Benjamin Baird, recruited 121 participants with an established interest in lucid dreaming and a history of reliable dream recall. Each participant was studied across 3 consecutive nights, receiving one of 3 doses in randomized counterbalanced order: 0 milligrams of galantamine, 4 milligrams, or 8 milligrams. The capsules were identical in appearance. Neither the participants nor the researchers knew, on any given night, which dose had been taken. The protocol was the same each time: sleep for roughly 4.5 hours, wake up, recall a dream, ingest the capsule, stay out of bed for at least 30 minutes, then return to sleep while practicing the mnemonic induction technique LaBerge had developed decades earlier. The results were clean, and the effect scaled with dose. On placebo nights, 14% of participants reported at least one lucid dream, a rate consistent with what the underlying sample would produce without any pharmacological assistance. On the 4 milligram nights, the rate climbed to 27%. On the 8 milligram nights, it reached 42%. The integrated protocol, galantamine combined with the wake back to bed procedure and the mnemonic technique, produced at least one lucid dream in 57% of participants across the 2 active dose nights. By any measure that has been applied to lucid dream induction, these numbers are among the strongest ever reported. The baseline for purely cognitive methods, in the best studies, sits in the range of 17 to 20% per week. Galantamine plus the cognitive method, in a single night, roughly triples the cognitive method alone baseline. The pharmacology is doing real work. What the pharmacology is not doing is producing lucid dreams by itself. This is a point the paper is careful about and that popular summaries often blur. Galantamine does not create awareness. It creates the neurochemical conditions under which awareness, if the cognitive preparation has been done, is more likely to emerge. A participant who took the 8 mg dose without the mnemonic preparation beforehand showed a much smaller effect than a participant who took the same dose and completed the full induction protocol. The drug amplifies. The cognitive technique aims. Without both, the probability stays lower than either alone would suggest. There is a piece of this research that the study reports openly, and that anyone considering the technique outside a laboratory should know about. Galantamine, at the doses used in the trial, increased the frequency of a phenomenon called sleep paralysis by approximately 40% compared to placebo. Sleep paralysis is the experience of waking up or partially waking up while the muscle atonia of REM sleep is still active, finding yourself conscious, unable to move, sometimes accompanied by vivid hallucinations that are produced by the dreaming brain bleeding into the waking state. For most people who experience it, sleep paralysis is frightening while it lasts and harmless once it ends. For some people, particularly those with a history of anxiety or certain sleep disorders, it can be significantly more distressing. A 40% increase in its occurrence is not a trivial side effect. There are also more ordinary pharmacological concerns. Galantamine can cause nausea, digestive upset, vivid and occasionally unpleasant dreams even in non-lucid form, and interactions with other medications that anyone taking it ought to have reviewed by someone qualified to do so. The trial was conducted under medical supervision. It was not a guide for home use. I want to pause here, because the broader point the galantamine research opens is more interesting than the practical details. If a specific subjective experience, the recognition, inside a dream, that one is dreaming, can be made substantially more probable by shifting the levels of a single neurotransmitter, then the experience is pharmacologically tractable in a way that most people do not, at first, associate with consciousness. We are used to the idea that drugs can put us to sleep, wake us up, blunt pain, lift mood, impair memory. We are less used to the idea that specific, nameable, structured subjective states, including highly abstract ones like metacognitive awareness of being in a dream, can be tilted into or out of existence by adjusting the rate at which an enzyme breaks down a particular molecule. The galantamine result does not mean that consciousness is reducible to acetylcholine. It does mean that the relationship between chemistry and experience is tighter than many of us intuit. The key that opens the door is not the door, but the door does respond to a key, and the key is this small, specific, chemically definable thing. What the mechanism actually is inside the brain remains less clear than the clinical effect. The leading hypothesis is that increased acetylcholine during REM intensifies the phasic activity of the state, the bursts of firing in the brainstem and cortex that drive the most vivid portions of each dream, and that this intensification makes the prefrontal parietal network more likely to cross the threshold at which it begins firing coherently enough to support self-awareness. This is plausible. It is also not proven. There are competing accounts that emphasize the drug's effects on specific receptor subtypes, or on the timing of REM within the night, or on the coupling between cholinergic and other neuromodulatory systems. The honest state of the field is that we know the drug works. We know roughly why it ought to work given what we know about REM pharmacology, and we do not yet know, at the level of circuit dynamics, precisely what it does during the moments when lucidity emerges. That is a gap worth acknowledging. What it leaves you with, as the listener, is a slightly different picture of what you are tonight than you probably had a few hours ago. Somewhere in the brainstem, right now, cholinergic neurons are preparing for the first REM period of the night. That preparation will arrive whether or not you pay attention to it. Over the hours ahead, your acetylcholine levels will rise and fall several times, each rise associated with a new REM episode, each fall associated with the return to deeper sleep. You have not taken a drug. You have not prepared. The chemistry that produces dreams is going to run anyway, on its own schedule, according to rhythms your brain has been refining since the earliest hours of your life. If a lucid moment arises tonight, it will arise inside that chemistry, which is already circulating. If it does not, the absence will also be chemistry. There is no outside place from which any of this is happening. There is only, underneath everything, the slow rise and fall of molecules in the dark, and whatever experience that rise and fall is currently producing. Your brain, right now, is doing something that is unusual even by its own standards. It is holding several kinds of information simultaneously, without consulting any of them against reality. You are not currently asking, for example, whether the voice you are listening to is real. You are not running a background check on whether this room you are in is the room it appears to be. You are not continuously verifying that the sensations in your body, the pressure of whatever surface you are on, the temperature of the air, correspond to an accurate picture of the world. You are simply accepting them, one after another, as given. This is efficient. It is also, in a specific and precise way, the same thing your brain does during a dream. The difference between the two states is smaller than it feels from the inside, and it has taken sleep science roughly 15 years to work out exactly where the smallness lives. For most of the last decade, the standard way of describing lucid dreaming was as a hybrid state, a combination of REM sleep and waking consciousness, with the body running the physiology of the former and the mind running something like the cognition of the latter. The phrase appeared in essentially every review paper on the subject. It showed up in popular articles. It became the conceptual frame within which the field was organized. Lucid dreaming was REM plus wakefulness, and the interesting scientific problem was figuring out which elements of each were showing up in the unusual mixture. That framing, it has turned out, was probably wrong, or rather, it was imprecise in a way that the newer data has begun to reveal. In May of 2025, a research group led by Sofia Tsiouridou, working with Martin Dressler's laboratory in the Netherlands and pulling data from multiple laboratories across Europe and North America, published an analysis in the Journal of Neuroscience that used more sophisticated processing methods than any previous study and examined the electrophysiology of lucid dreaming across the largest aggregated sample ever assembled. What they found, or more accurately, what they did not find, reshaped the theoretical picture. The older claims about frontal gamma activity failed to replicate, as we have already seen. But equally important was what the new analysis replaced them with. Lucid dreaming, the paper argued, is not a hybrid between two distinct brain states. It is something narrower and stranger. It is a regime shift inside REM itself, a reconfiguration of activity that remains fundamentally REM, but with specific local changes in how the frontal and parietal regions coordinate with each other. The dreamer has not partially woken up. The dreamer is having a different kind of dream, produced by a different pattern of firing within a brain that is still, by every measurable criterion, asleep. The difference between these two ways of describing the phenomenon matters more than it first appears. If lucid dreaming is REM plus wakefulness, then it is a kind of failure of the sleep state, a leak of waking cognition into a place where it does not normally belong. If it is instead a different mode of REM, then it is one of the normal range of things the sleeping brain is capable of, produced by the same underlying machinery that produces ordinary dreaming, simply running in a different configuration. The first framing implies that lucidity is something extra, laid on top of sleep. The second implies that lucidity is already a possibility within sleep, needing only the right internal conditions to actualize. The evidence at this point favors the second, which brings us to the question of why some people have lucid dreams frequently and most people do not. The variance in this capacity is large, and it is consistent across repeated surveys of the general population. Roughly half of adults have experienced at least one lucid dream in their lifetime. Only about 1 person in 9 has 2 or more per month. Somewhere around 1 in 1,000 has them several times per week, often enough to be called a frequent lucid dreamer in the research literature. These are the people whose brains have become, for reasons that are not yet settled, especially good at producing the specific configuration Sioridou and her colleagues described. In 2018, Benjamin Baird's laboratory at the University of Wisconsin ran a study specifically comparing the brains of frequent lucid dreamers with carefully matched controls who almost never experienced lucidity. The comparison was made not during sleep, but during ordinary quiet wakefulness, while the subjects lay awake in an MRI scanner doing nothing in particular. What Baird wanted to know was whether the brains of habitual lucid dreamers showed any trait-level differences that would be visible even outside the lucid state itself. The answer was yes. Specifically, the anterior prefrontal cortex in frequent lucid dreamers showed stronger intrinsic functional connectivity with the regions around the angular gyrus and the middle temporal gyrus, the same network that, in Dressler's earlier imaging work, lit up during lucid moments inside REM. The network that supports lucid dreaming was simply more coherently wired in the brains of people who often had lucid dreams. That coherence was present during waking life. It was a feature of the brain, not just of the state. A more recent study, published in early 2026 by Nicola de Pisapia and his collaborators using multimodal MRI, extended this picture further. De Pisapia's team looked not just at functional connectivity, but at the structural anatomy of the brain. The grey matter density in specific regions, the white matter tracts that connect them. They found differences between frequent lucid dreamers and controls in several of the areas that had been implicated by earlier work. Grey matter differences in parts of the anterior and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Grey matter differences in the precuneus and adjacent parietal regions. Differences in the temporo-occipital areas that handle complex visual imagery. Taken together with the 2018 connectivity work, the picture that emerges is that frequent lucid dreaming is associated with measurable structural differences in the brain. Not just differences in how the networks activate, but differences in the physical substrate on which the activation runs. This is the point where the research becomes harder to interpret, because the obvious question is impossible to answer with the current data. Are those structural differences the cause of frequent lucid dreaming, or the consequence of it? Both are plausible. There are people who have lucid dreams easily from childhood, without any training, often because they have always been unusually vivid dreamers in general, and the metacognitive capacity seems to have come along with the vividness. For those people, something about the underlying brain structure was probably present before any practice began. There are also people who develop the capacity through years of deliberate practice, keeping dream journals, performing reality checks, doing the mnemonic exercises we have already discussed, and who eventually report lucid dreams at rates comparable to the naturally frequent group. The brain is plastic enough that sustained practice probably does reshape the relevant networks over time, in the same way that long-term meditation practice has been shown to produce measurable structural changes in related regions of the prefrontal cortex. The de Pisapia paper in fact noted the overlap. The brain regions that differ in frequent lucid dreamers are substantially the same regions that differ in long-term meditation practitioners. Whether this reflects shared causes or shared consequences is, again, not something the current data can settle. What it does settle is something that popular accounts of this subject often gloss over in order to keep the message encouraging. Not everyone can learn to lucid dream easily. Some people, after months of diligent practice, will still have only rare lucid dreams. Others, who have never tried any technique at all, will have them several times a week their entire lives. The instructions in self-help books tend to imply that the skill is purely a matter of effort and that enough commitment will reliably produce results. the evidence does not quite support that. Effort helps. Preparation helps. The cognitive techniques we have been describing do, on average, shift the probabilities in the direction the books promise. But the baseline varies enormously across individuals, for reasons that are partly genetic, partly developmental, partly related to ordinary dreaming vividness, and partly unknown. Some of what determines whether you will have a lucid dream tonight was decided before you were born. Some was decided by patterns of sleep and attention that were set down in your childhood. Some is still, in the ordinary sense of the word, up to you, but less of it than the most enthusiastic accounts tend to suggest. This is not a discouraging finding. It is, if anything, a more accurate one. The brain you are carrying is the brain you have. Whatever capacity it has for producing lucid moments is some combination of its structural layout, its connectivity, its history, and its current state tonight. You cannot know in advance which combination you are. Most people, across most nights, will spend their dreaming hours in the ordinary non-lucid mode that has been the default of human sleep since long before there was a human history to record it. A small fraction will, without particularly trying, cross into the other configuration, the one where the self reassembles briefly inside the dream and watches it happen. Neither mode is superior to the other. Neither is a failure. They are two ways a brain can dream, and every brain will, at some point in its life, have done both. All across the world, right now, something approaching 200 million people are in REM sleep. This number is a rough calculation. Roughly 20% of the nightly REM-capable population is in a REM period at any given moment, and on a planet of this size, that works out to somewhere in the low hundreds of millions. Of those people, a small handful will become lucid before morning. Most of them will not remember it. A smaller handful still will remember it clearly enough to write it down. Most of the dreaming happening in the world tonight is, in the ordinary sense, unwitnessed from inside. Most nights, most brains, most dreams, produced for no audience, registered by no internal observer, ending at dawn with nothing carried across the threshold, but a residue of feeling and a few fragments of image. This has been the condition of sleep since vertebrates first evolved something recognizable as REM, hundreds of millions of years before anyone noticed, and it will be the condition of sleep tonight across this planet, for all but the thinnest slice of the brains participating in it. In the spring of 2019, in a sleep laboratory at Northwestern University, a graduate student named Karen Konkoly sat in a darkened control room watching a young woman sleep. The woman was wired for full polysomnography, the same battery of sensors that had monitored LaBerge at Stanford 4 decades earlier, the same essential configuration of electrodes that Hearn had used on Worsley and Hull. The difference was what Konkoly was preparing to do. She was not waiting for the dreamer to signal her. She was preparing to signal the dreamer. Specifically, she was preparing to ask the dreamer a math question out loud through a speaker set to a volume low enough not to wake anyone. And she was preparing to find out whether the dreamer would answer. This had never been done before. The scientific literature on lucid dreaming had, up to that point, assumed the flow of communication ran in one direction. A dreamer could, with enormous effort and specific training, generate a signal detectable by the waking world, the eye movements, the sniff patterns, the muscle twitches that had been the entire behavioral repertoire of lucid dream research since 1975. What no one had shown was the reverse. No one had shown that a question sent into a dreaming brain from outside could be heard, understood, processed, and answered while the dreamer remained asleep. The assumption, reasonable on its face, was that sleep involves enough sensory gating to make that kind of two-way conversation impossible. Even if a sleeping person registered the sound, the assumption went, the dreaming brain would not be able to treat the sound as an actual question requiring an actual answer. It would simply be absorbed into the dream as ambient noise or ignored altogether. Konkoly had reason to suspect this assumption was wrong. She had been working for several years with Ken Paller's cognitive neuroscience laboratory at Northwestern, and Paller's group had been studying targeted memory reactivation, a technique in which specific sounds, paired during waking with specific memories, are replayed during sleep to strengthen those memories. The targeted memory reactivation research had established, across dozens of experiments, that sleeping brains register external sounds and process them at a surprising depth, not consciously, in the ordinary sense, but enough to produce measurable effects on what the brain consolidated overnight. If the sleeping brain could respond selectively to sound cues during non-REM sleep, there was at least a plausible case that a sufficiently lucid brain during REM might be able to respond deliberately. The plausibility was enough to try. The protocol Konkoly developed was straightforward in design and almost unreasonable in what it asked for. A participant who had trained in lucid dreaming would come to the laboratory, go to sleep, and, at a predetermined point in the night, be allowed to enter REM. Once polysomnography confirmed that the participant was in REM and had signaled lucidity through a prearranged eye movement pattern, the experimenter would speak a question through a speaker in the sleep room. The question might be arithmetic, 8 minus 6. It might be yes or no. It might be a request to perform a specific pattern of eye movements in response. The participant, still asleep, still in REM, was to answer the question using eye movement signals, or, in some participants, a specific pattern of controlled in-out sniffs that the equipment could detect even during muscle atonia. The sniff pattern was a refinement. The nasal passages are one of the few muscle groups not paralyzed during REM, which makes them useful for any signaling task that needs more bandwidth than eye movements alone can provide. The results, published in Current Biology in early 2021, were striking in a way that is difficult to overstate. The sleeping participants answered the questions, not every time, and not every participant on every night, but often enough, and specifically enough, that the effect could not be attributed to chance. Across the 4 laboratories that ran the protocol, Konkoly's team at Northwestern and collaborating groups in France, Germany and the Netherlands, dreamers correctly answered arithmetic questions, signaled responses to yes or no queries, and performed requested behaviors while remaining, by every physiological criterion, asleep in REM. They did not wake up to answer. They did not emerge into some in-between state of confused wakefulness. The brain waves stayed in REM, the muscles stayed paralyzed, and somewhere inside the dream, a mind heard what had been asked, computed a response, and produced the motor pattern that would communicate that response back to the experimenter. What makes this finding harder to absorb than it first sounds is the implication about what a sleeping brain is actually capable of. For most of the 20th century, sleep was treated as a state of profound disconnection from the environment, a withdrawal, a shutting down, a temporary absence of the organism from the world. The Konkoly result does not exactly contradict that picture, but it places a specific and narrow exception inside it. A lucid brain in REM can, apparently, maintain enough contact with external reality to hear a question. Enough working memory to hold the question while producing an answer, enough arithmetic capacity to solve a simple problem, enough voluntary motor control to produce a signal, and enough meta-awareness to understand that the signal is meant for a listener in the waking world. That is not a small list. That is, in fact, most of the cognitive repertoire that defines full waking consciousness. The usual description of the dreaming brain as a closed system, generating its own content in isolation from the environment, is wrong in at least this one specific and measurable way. The system, on some nights, in some people, is not closed. The 4 laboratory replication mattered for a reason that is easy to miss. Findings in sleep research, especially findings about rare and hard-to-produce states, are often based on small samples in single laboratories, and they suffer all the replication difficulties that come with such work. What Konkoly's team had arranged was something sleep science rarely achieves: simultaneous independent replication across research groups that had developed somewhat different protocols in different countries, with different equipment, with different participants, all producing the same basic result. The dreamers answered. The answers were correct more often than chance would predict. The effect was real, and it was not specific to any one laboratory's methods. Whatever was happening in those lucid brains was happening reliably enough that 4 separate teams could document it independently within a narrow window of time. For the researchers in the field, the immediate implication of the finding was that a new kind of experimental instrument had just become available. If sleeping brains could be asked questions and could answer them, then many of the questions that dream research had been unable to approach for most of its history became, in principle, approachable. You could ask, inside the dream, what the dreamer was experiencing. You could test specific cognitive capacities in the dreaming state without waiting for a post hoc report that might have been distorted by waking up interference. You could run experiments that treated the dreaming brain as a participant rather than as a black box that you could only study from outside. The method had limits. It only worked with trained lucid dreamers, only during REM, only during moments of sustained lucidity. But within those limits it opened, as Konkoly herself put it in the paper, a new kind of window into what a sleeping mind can do. What came next, over the 5 years that followed, was the slow work of figuring out what to do with that window. Konkoly's own follow-up research focused on a particular question that had been hovering in the background of dream science for a long time. If the sleeping brain could receive and process communication from outside, could it also be asked to work on a problem? Could it, specifically, be asked to continue working on a problem the waking dreamer had failed to solve before going to bed? And could the results of that work be measured against what the brain produced without any such prompting? The answer to that question, when it arrived in February of this year, was yes, with an accompanying finding that nobody, including the researchers, had expected. The finding overturned a simple assumption about how conscious effort relates to creative problem solving, and it did so in a way that is worth spending an entire stretch of time on, because the implications extend well beyond lucid dreaming into the nature of what the mind does when no one, in the ordinary sense, is watching it do it. As you listen to this now, hundreds of sleeping brains in laboratories scattered across a dozen countries are, at this exact moment, being monitored in the hope of producing exactly the kind of lucid REM episode that would allow this kind of research to continue. Most of those attempts will fail tonight, as most such attempts have failed every night. A handful will succeed. Somewhere, probably in Europe given the time zones, a researcher is quietly watching a polygraph trace produce the distinctive eye movement pattern that indicates a trained dreamer has just become lucid and is preparing to ask a question into a microphone and will, in the next few seconds, wait to see whether an answer comes back. Your own brain is not doing this. Your brain is doing the ordinary version. The descent, the cycles, the generation of dream content for no audience and no experimenter. The ordinary version is what sleep has always mostly been, and it is what it will be again in a few hours when you finally let go of the day and enter it. Picture, for a moment, the setup inside the Northwestern sleep laboratory on any given night during the winter of 2025 and the early weeks of 2026. A participant has arrived in the evening, roughly 2 hours before their normal bedtime. They have been given a set of puzzles, matchstick rearrangements, rebus images, verbal riddles of the kind that cannot be solved by working through them systematically, the kind where the answer either arrives as a sudden shift of perspective or does not arrive at all. Each puzzle has been paired with a specific soundtrack, a short musical phrase, a few seconds of tones, a distinctive audio fingerprint. The participant has 3 minutes per puzzle. Most of the puzzles, by design, will remain unsolved when the time is up. Once the participant has worked through the full set, they are hooked up to full polysomnography and allowed to sleep normally until 4 in the morning. At 4, they are gently woken. They are given a short training protocol developed by the same laboratory over several years, designed to increase the probability that their subsequent REM periods will produce lucid dreams, a procedure called targeted lucidity reactivation, which pairs a specific 3-tone cue with a lucid state of mind during the brief 20-minute waking window. Then they return to sleep. When polysomnography confirms that they have re-entered REM, the experimenters play, through speakers set to a volume chosen not to wake them, the soundtracks of 2 of the puzzles they had failed to solve earlier in the evening. The instruction the participant was given before bed was simple. If you hear a puzzle's soundtrack inside your dream, keep working on the puzzle. In the morning, when the participant wakes, they are asked to describe their dreams and then, separately, to attempt the puzzles again. That is the protocol. 20 participants completed it over the course of multiple overnight sessions. The results were published in early February of 2026 in the journal Neuroscience of Consciousness, with Karen Konkoly as the lead author and Ken Palla as the senior investigator. The finding, on its surface, was the one the lay headlines focused on. Scientists had found a way to plant specific content into the dreams of sleeping people, and the planted content had measurably improved the probability that those people would solve the corresponding problems after waking up. 75% of participants reported dreams that contained elements of the cued puzzles. Puzzles that appeared in dreams were later solved at roughly 42%, compared to 17% for puzzles that did not appear in dreams. The effect was real, it was significant, and it represented, fairly described, the first direct experimental evidence that REM dreams actively contribute to creative problem solving, rather than merely reflecting the problems the brain has already processed. The headline finding is worth taking seriously on its own terms. It is also worth holding it with appropriate caution. This is a single study with 20 participants, recruited from a specific population, people with prior experience of lucid dreaming, who are not representative of the general sleeping population, and it has not yet been replicated by independent laboratories. Its findings are consistent with the broader Konkoly research program and with a reasonable extension of what we know about targeted memory reactivation more generally. That is enough reason to take the results seriously as a preliminary finding. It is not yet enough to treat the finding as settled. The pattern in this field, as we have seen, is that striking initial results sometimes hold up and sometimes do not. And the final picture usually takes 5 to 10 years to stabilize. What follows should be read in that light. What follows, though, is where the study becomes genuinely interesting. The headline number, 42% versus 17%, is an average across all the ways a cued puzzle could appear in a dream. When Konkoly and her colleagues broke that number down by the specific type of dream experience in which the puzzle had been encountered, something unexpected showed up. The participants' dreams fell into 3 broad categories based on what the participant reported afterward and what the physiological record showed. Some of the dreams were lucid dreams in which the dreamer had been consciously aware of being in a dream and had deliberately worked on the cued puzzle. Some were ordinary non-lucid dreams in which the puzzle content had appeared, but the dreamer had no awareness of being in a dream. And some, a subset that emerged in the data almost as a curiosity before revealing itself as the most interesting category, were instances in which the participant had responded to the cue during REM through the sniff pattern they had been trained to produce, but on waking had no memory of having done so. No memory of the puzzle appearing in any dream, and in some cases no memory of that stretch of the night at all. The solving rates broke down by category in a way that, before the data came in, would have struck almost anyone as the opposite of what should happen. Puzzles worked on during lucid dreams, with full conscious awareness and deliberate effort, were solved the following morning at 11%. Puzzles that had appeared in ordinary non-lucid dreams, with no awareness that any work was happening, were solved at 46%. And puzzles where the participant had responded to the cue in real time, produced a sniff signal indicating engagement with the task, but remembered nothing afterward. Those were solved at 67%. The people who tried hardest, in the state that is supposed to be the most cognitively powerful version of dreaming, did worst. The people who processed the problem without any awareness of doing so did best. And the people who engaged with the task in some real but unconscious way, leaving no trace of the engagement in memory, did better than either. I want to pause here, because the temptation, when you first hear this result, is to find some reason it does not mean what it sounds like it means. Small sample, trained lucid dreamers, specific kinds of puzzles. Maybe the lucid group was overthinking. Maybe the sniff responders were lucky. All of these are reasonable caveats. Some of them may turn out, when the replication attempts begin, to be the correct explanation. But the pattern is internally consistent in a way that makes dismissal difficult. The direction is clean. More conscious effort, less solving. Less conscious effort, more solving. Whatever is happening in those dreams, it is not the kind of activity where trying harder helps. If anything, trying seems to be part of the problem. The researchers' own interpretation, offered carefully in the paper, is that the creative restructuring these puzzles require is the kind of cognitive work that depends on the brain's ability to range across unexpected associations, to abandon the first interpretation and try a second, to let a pattern that was not obvious during waking emerge from a different angle of approach. During ordinary waking thought, the prefrontal cortex tightly constrains which associations are considered, filtering for relevance, efficiency, plausibility. This filtering is, most of the time, what makes waking cognition useful. It also makes waking cognition bad at a particular kind of problem. The kind of problem where the right answer is one that the relevance filter, if it were running, would have rejected before it reached awareness. Creative insight, in the cognitive science literature, has long been associated with states where that filter is loosened. REM, sleep, by the neurochemistry we have already described, is such a state. Lucid REM, with the prefrontal parietal network partially reactivated, is a state where the filter begins running again. The dreamer, becoming lucid, starts imposing waking-style evaluation on the dream's content. The loosening closes. The ranges of association narrow back toward the ones that had already failed to produce the insight during waking, and the advantage of being in REM in the first place disappears. There is a deeper version of this that the Konkoly result points toward without quite stating. The cognitive posture that produces creative solutions is, in a specific sense, a posture of relinquishment. Not effortlessness, exactly, but a stepping back from the active, goal-oriented pressure that defines most waking problem-solving. The dreamer who responded to the sniff cue without remembering anything afterward was, presumably, engaged with the puzzle in some functional way. The engagement produced the signal, but without the particular kind of conscious self-monitoring that would have preserved the memory. That engagement, freed from the overhead of watching itself engage, produced the highest rate of later insight. The engagement that watched itself most carefully, the lucid dream, produced the lowest. The data suggest, in effect, that whatever the dreaming brain is doing when it does its most useful creative work, it is doing best when no one, in the ordinary sense of that word, is there to do it. This is a strange finding to sit with, and it has implications that extend beyond lucid dreaming into the more general question of what conscious effort actually contributes to difficult cognitive work. The popular picture of creativity involves deliberation, attention, focus, the sustained application of a mind to a problem. The Konkoly data, tentatively, suggest that for at least some kinds of creative problem, the sustained application of a mind to a problem is the thing that prevents the problem from being solved. The mind is the bottleneck, the unconscious processing that continues during sleep, unobstructed by self-monitoring, may do work that the conscious version of the same mind cannot do. And this may be true not only when the sleeping person has formally tried to work on the problem, but also, and perhaps especially, when they have simply let go of it and allowed the brain to process it according to its own schedule, in its own way, for its own reasons. For a channel built around a particular kind of sleep documentary, this finding carries one specific implication that I want to name, because it is relevant to how the hours ahead will work. Whatever your brain will do tonight with the thoughts and images and unresolved problems you carry into sleep, most of that work will happen in states you will not remember. A small fraction may surface in the morning as the ordinary sense of having slept on something. A much larger fraction will have happened and will be gone, the way most of every night is gone, leaving only the rested body and the slightly rearranged mind that dawn returns to you. The work is not watched. The work does not need to be watched. Whatever is happening in there, you are not required to supervise it. The brain knows how to sleep, the way it knows how to breathe, and the most useful thing you can do, most nights, is to get out of its way. What does it mean to understand something about your own mind? The question is harder than it looks, because the understanding, if it comes, will be produced by the same mind it is about, which means that any discovery will, in a sense, be a discovery the mind makes about itself, from inside the only vantage point it has. This recursive quality has haunted every question this documentary has touched. The people who first proved lucid dreaming was real did so by using their own minds as the instruments of proof. The researchers who have mapped the neural basis of the lucid state have, on the days they did that work, been running the same prefrontal parietal networks they were studying. The fact that any of this is knowable at all by anyone depends on a mind being able to examine what it is while being the thing it is examining. That is not a neutral methodological situation. It is the condition of the whole enterprise. Think for a moment about everyone we have met along the way. Alan Worsley in the spring of 1975, moving his eyes in a pattern that had never before been sent out of a dream. Keith Hearn, watching the polygraph chart record something no instrument had ever recorded, writing letters to Chicago and Stanford that would be read carefully and acted on only partly. Stephen LaBerge, 3 years later, in his own body, in his own sleep, producing the same proof independently, and then spending 3 years and 500 dreams building the technique that would carry his name. Martin Dressler, in a scanner control room in Munich, watching 14 nights of failed recordings and finally, on a single night, catching 2 50-second windows that would become the foundational imaging data of the field. Ursula Voss, whose finding was beautiful and whose finding did not survive, which is itself one of the most honorable things that can happen to a scientist. Benjamin Baird, who did the careful work of correction and who also identified the connectivity patterns that tell us some brains are simply built differently. Karen Konkoly, asking questions into speakers in sleeping rooms, getting answers back, and then, 5 years later, uncovering the paradox that harder conscious effort inside a dream produces less useful work than softer unconscious engagement. Each of these researchers, when they did the work, was producing knowledge about a state they themselves entered every night. The subject and the object of the research were never fully separated. They never could be. What has emerged across 50 years of this particular corner of neuroscience is a picture that is more modest than the popular versions tend to describe, and more interesting than the popular versions tend to credit. We know that lucid dreaming is real. We know it occurs during REM sleep, not during any kind of micro-awakening or hybrid wakeful state. We know that a specific network of brain regions, the anterior prefrontal cortex, the parietal cortex around the angular gyrus, certain temporal areas, reactivates during the lucid moments, producing the subjective experience of recognizing the dream as a dream. We know that some people are structurally predisposed to this capacity and that others can develop it, to varying degrees, through sustained practice. We know that induction techniques work, probabilistically rather than reliably, and that the most effective combine cognitive preparation with either timed waking or pharmacological adjustment of the neurochemistry that drives REM. We know that a sleeping brain can, when sufficiently lucid, receive and respond to external communication. And we know from the most recent work that the kind of cognitive activity that happens during dreams may be most creatively useful precisely when no one, in the ordinary sense, is there to supervise it. What we do not know, what this field has not answered, is what it is like, from the inside, to be the brain in which any of this is happening. The mechanism is measurable, the experience is not. The gap between the two is the same gap that sits at the center of all of consciousness research, and lucid dreaming has not closed it, though lucid dreaming has, in some specific ways, given us a slightly better view of its edges. When a dreamer becomes lucid and signals it from inside the dream, we know that subjective experience is occurring, because the dreamer is telling us so, under conditions that rule out most of the alternative explanations. But we still cannot detect the experience itself. We can only detect its signs. That distinction is not a failure of the tools. It is a feature of what experience is. There is also, running through all of this, a question worth holding. Several of the induction methods we have described come with real costs. Galantamine produces meaningful side effects for a measurable fraction of the people who try it. The wake-back-to-bed procedure fragments sleep in ways that, practiced chronically, would be unwise for anyone concerned about long-term cognitive health. The persistent pursuit of lucid dreaming undertaken with too much intensity has been linked in some research to a subtle erosion of the line between dreaming and waking that a minority of practitioners find disorienting rather than expanding. None of this is reason to avoid the topic, and the research literature on population-level effects does not support alarm. But it is reason to remember that what you are listening to is a subject, not a prescription. The science is worth understanding. Whether to attempt to cultivate this capacity in your own life is a different question, and it is one that depends on who you are, what you already carry, and what you actually want from your own sleep. Questions that only you can answer, and that you are probably not going to answer tonight. What I want to leave you with, before the rest of this dissolves into whatever your brain is going to do with it in the hours ahead, is a single observation that has been quietly accumulating across the previous 11 chapters, and that I think is the real thing this subject has to teach. The ability to recognize, from inside an experience, what kind of experience it is. This is what lucid dreaming is, at its root. The dreamer becoming lucid is a mind noticing its own state. And the strange fact the neuroscience keeps pointing at is that this capacity, this meta-awareness, this ability to step back and see what you are in the middle of, is not continuously available even during waking life. It is something the prefrontal cortex produces, when it produces it, with the same kind of probabilistic firing that governs everything else the brain does. You are not, at this moment, continuously aware of being aware. You are doing something closer to the ordinary non-lucid mode of waking, absorbed in the content of your experience, not stepping back from it. Most waking life for most people is more like a non-lucid dream than we usually admit. The lucid dream, in this sense, is not the exception. It is a rare state of meta-awareness that happens to occur during sleep, briefly illuminating how much of the rest of mental life, waking and dreaming both, happens without that illumination. The dream is not the anomaly. The lucidity is. And the lucidity is rare everywhere it happens, in every state of mind in which it can occur, for every mind that has ever been capable of producing it. That rarity is not a defect. It is the texture of what having a mind is. The mind that sometimes notices itself, and more often does not, and lives through most of its existence in the condition of being the dream rather than the dreamer, that mind is yours, and it is every mind that has ever existed, and it is the condition under which slowly and imperfectly anything about any of this has come to be known at all. You are going to fall asleep soon, if you have not already. I want to describe what is about to happen. And then I want to stop talking because the science of this ends at the threshold and you are nearly at it. Over the next 90 minutes, your brain will descend through the stages of non-REM sleep, pulling your cortex into slower and slower rhythms until it reaches the deep, synchronized activity of slow-wave sleep. At the bottom of that descent, around 90 minutes after you lose consciousness, the brainstem will fire the signal that begins the first REM period of the night. Your muscles will lock into atonia. Your eyes will begin to move. Your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which has been quieting gradually for the last hour, will go dark, and the visual and emotional and memory-related cortices will light up, and somewhere inside that lit-up quiet, a dream will begin. Somewhere else in the world, at this exact moment, another brain is entering the same state, and another, and another. Somewhere, a brain will cross into lucid awareness during that first REM period, and will not remember it in the morning. Somewhere else, a brain will have a lucid dream it will remember for years. Somewhere, a brain will have no dreams it can recall. The architecture is the same for all of them. The outcomes are different. Each of these brains is running the same basic machinery that has been running in every mammal for 100 million years, with minor variations specific to the particular organism involved. None of them, tonight, will fully understand what has happened to them by morning. None of them needs to. The machinery does its work regardless of whether anyone inside it is watching. What you will remember from tonight is likely to be fragments, and some of those fragments will be stranger than they should be, because fragments from dreams always are. What you will not remember is most of what happens. This has been the condition of human sleep since humans began. It is the condition of sleep now. It will be the condition of sleep in 1,000 years. The research we have spent the last 2 hours with is the slow accumulation of what a few minds, working at the edge of what their methods could resolve, have managed to learn about this enormous and ancient process. What they have learned is real. What they have not learned is larger. And the thing they are studying, the thing you are about to enter, does not require their understanding in order to happen. It has been happening in you for every night of your life. Good night.